Okay, time for a little video explainer of what I was talking about on Sunday as regards getting things into Logic. Now, this is how I open a session when I get tracks that aren't mine and I don't have any control over stuff until I get into it. And I have a look at it, and once you drag it in, or in the process of dragging it in, you can just bring things over from the Finder window, and then it'll ask you, okay, do you want to put these on different tracks? And you say yes. And then part of that dialogue is that are these from the same session? And you say yes. And that's basically so that things will time align to zero, and it'll group them as if it's a simple project. As if you're bringing something in and it already knows what to do with it. It doesn't have to redesign or really analyze where the beats and bars are and all that stuff, or where the zero and other timestamps are. So it just starts it at zero. Over on the right here, the thing is it creates what it's called a multi-track set. Now there's a file back in the Finder. Let me save this. Let me save this thing here. Right now it's untitled. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go test, and I'm going to put it on a local drive so I don't screw something up. And I actually put it in my downloads folder because it has just a limited future here. I'm going to save it as a folder. Do that. Okay, so once that is done, this multi-track set isn't just a way of enclosing folders within Logic, enclosing the tracks, but you can also use it. It forms a file, a mono file, just so it has like a record of this is everything that was brought in. Now this is a terrible mix because Logic is just summing it together, so this might be very rude, and it can just hit the space bar and get whatever. So as if you were to go into Logic and open it up and then press play once all these things are in here, it'll basically be a mono representation of that. It just adds it together, and then that is considered a multi-track set here. If you did this track import again, you would end up getting another set of a similar thing like this, and it'd be enclosed in a folder. Disregarding all of that, let's just focus on one track. Okay, when you're looking at it visually right now, at this small resolution where the tracks are not very, tall, let's say, it looks like they're all in mono, right? And you'd think, okay, great, everything's fine, right? But if you zoom in on it, you'll see that everything that looks mono is actually coming in as if it's a stereo track, although what we're really looking at, of course, is still mono information, but it's on both sides of a stereo track, which of course is nonsense. So if I were to pick bass right here, you can go over to this side where it says exactly this is what the file is. It says it's a 44K 24-bit 78.4 megabyte file. All right. So 78.4 because it's stereo, but it's not really stereo. It's got nothing happening on either side of it. So what I do, and this is a thing that when it comes in like this, it's not changing the underlying file, although it is writing a new one. What I do is I go into it's a menu over here, functions. This is not something you'll do, but once you get smart to the fact that people send you these things, you might want to say, hey, I can save some file space, or a file that is big mono, like we're looking at here, will behave differently as far as panning than a file that is genuine mono, right? So I'll go to selection-based processing, and I've got a preset called stereo to mono, and all it is a gain plugin that merges it down, and then I just, because I've done this so many times, I just hit apply. So what it'll do is it'll write a new file, a mono one that of course can be placed properly into the spectrum of left and right. So I would go through every one of these things that does not need to be pseudo stereo on two sides of a track, and I would go ahead and correct that, because that makes me able to have my panning positions. So anyway, down here in the lower right, it has base 1, okay? So it's made a new file, 39.3 megabytes, all right? And so what I'll do here to demonstrate what we're looking at here is I'll add a track, just an empty track, and then I will bring this one in. So now we're looking at, oh, that's, sorry, I'm at the original one. Bring in the original stereo one here, pseudo stereo. So there we have the bass that we started with and the bass that we're going to use, right? And when I click on one of them down here, it's 39.3. And when I click on the other one, the pseudo stereo one, it's 78 megabytes and more. So, of course, I would use the smaller one, not because it's smaller, but because it's mono. And so you might think, why does that matter? So if we were to listen to just this one segment of audio right there, and then the corresponding similar one here, let me get into a plug-in here. I'll put it on the stereo out so you can tell that it's all running through the same meter. We'll use level meter, and we'll play just that same section of the track. And right here, you'll see that this indicates -12, right? And then we'll set the peak. Let's see, what's our, peak and true peak and RMS. I like to see 2 meters, right? Okay, so you'll see that the true peak on that, on the mono one, is -12.7, okay? If we just toggle over to the other one, play the same segment, but it's on this track now, all of a sudden it jumped right up to -8. So it's about almost 5 dB different, just because the information is on two sides of the same file. All right, so nearly 5 dB of difference just because it's, same thing on the two sides of the same file, or it's just a single mono piece of information. Now, when you play all this stuff back, if there are so many of these tracks that have that going on, right? If you play the same thing and introduce the whole song, there's going to be some keyboards at the beginning that come in abruptly, but it's going to come in, it's going to rock. And you watch the level meter on the main bus here, that's going to be pretty rude, because there's going to be all those things running, 5 dB louder, maybe, if it happens that way across every track that was sent in. And so many of them really don't need to be that loud. So even reducing them to mono when that's the right format for whatever the input is, vocal or a bass or a single guitar track, anything that doesn't actually have genuine stereo information like an overhead pair might still be 2 mono tracks. So if somebody sends in, a single mic that's on one channel and a single mic that's on the other channel, but for each one there's 2 different tracks, but each one has, a left and right thing to it that is matching the information, then all of that will be significantly louder because there's 2 mics portraying, 5 dB more than it should be, apparently, on each mic, right? So when you add it all together and you play the song back, let's just see what we get. All right. So once once everything kicks in, it immediately goes to a true peak that is way over your digital ceiling, right? It says 6.8 positive and 4.7 on the right side. So obviously nothing is mixed, but when you just play these tracks back, that is what you would be up against, right? Well, the solution I come up with in terms of just being able to bring it back to a listenable level before I start doing any work is I get into a new VCA and it creates this other fader back here. And because I know that I'm looking at 6.8 dB of overage, then what I would want to do is on this VCA bring it down by about 7 dB, although I might as well just take it down to 9 and get a nice clearance. That's fine. Yeah, there's about 9. Okay, so if I were to do the exact same thing and just bring in that opening part of a song, we should have some headroom. And indeed, that is what happened. You can just see that using a VCA, it doesn't change the balance of anything. It just brings the overall thing down such that when it goes into the stereo out channel, you're not being slammed, right? So you're saving it from doing that. But once again, we haven't yet, I shouldn't have to reduce it that much just to start my work. So that's when I would make sure that I've done all the mono reductions that I need to do. That might buy me a little bit of headroom because I'm just getting rid of considerable amount of information that doesn't need to be there, right? But just to see it one more time, I'll ride the VCA a little bit. So that is actively being operated. Okay, so I'll put it back to -9 or so. There we go. So that's good to know. Now, what I was saying about getting into Logic and its file editor, here's how that goes. Let's take, for example, this bass track. When you select the track, you can double click on it, or just press E, and you'll end up getting this in the file editor. You want to make sure it's not track, it's file. It's the middle one in the display here. So let me just zoom to the right view here. So this is the file in the editor. Now, this is where I'll do those kind of permanent edits. I won't do it right now, but I will show you that we got change gain, right? You go to functions menu once you've selected something or the whole track. And what I'll do really is I'll select the whole track, Command A, and I'll go to functions, and this is how I know exactly what's on this track. And I'll go search maximum, and what it does is it gives me this window down here, and there's these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I only really pay attention to the ones on the right and the search maximum one. So right now it says that having not edited it at all, this mono track is coming in at -8.5, 8.53. Now, if I wanted to bring the entire track down, I would use the arrow buttons on the second one right here, or I could drag the numbers up and down. But let's just say I wanted to bring it down by 5 dB so we can get an appreciable change. It tells you that those 5 dB will make it -13.52. And if I were to bring it down more and say -8, then it'll be -16.52. And that would be the permanent change to the entire track. It would change the file that you find in the Finder. And that would be okay. We can do that. Now, it's permanent except for if you work quick and you realize you made a mistake, you can undo it. All right. Now, panning or getting back out and looking at a wider section of a track down here, you can see that from one end to the other, it's almost exactly the same dynamic. because I presume he was playing a bass into a compressor. And then I see this bit where it appears as if it's a punch in because you can audibly hear the level jump. So if we're playing from a point right about here, I'll use this little button up here where you can hear it. Okay, so that sounds like it had been a punch in while he was, just correcting something. Otherwise, it looks like it's an entirely correct performance done from start to finish, and it, completely feels live. But there is this sonic shift and the level difference. If this was something I wanted to address here, I would go to change gain in function menu, and I'd want to make sure this is all back to 0 here. And I would search the maximum right there. Now, this part right here appears to be, it's as loud as it was before, right? Because that's the peak of the track. But if we were to take its neighboring section like this and say, hey, how loud is this? And this is a little bit of back and forth work, I realize. You go to change gain and you select maximum. This is minus 13. So we're dealing with about a 5 dB jump, right? So it might be good to get in to this point and figure out exactly where we can find a suitable cut point from here to here, just that punch-in section, and bring it down by about, let's say 4 dB, right? It doesn't have to be slashed and reduced to whatever its surrounding is. It just has to seem like it fits there. So that's minus 4, and boom, there's the whole track. So that would be a permanent one. That means I don't have to hit a compressor too hard if I just leave it alone and it's playing in the mixer, and I don't have to set any automation. I don't have to have a goofy gain plug-in or anything like that because, hey, I don't have to have a gain plug-in kick in. This is just a permanent thing. The file is now written this way, and there wouldn't be any need to go changing it again. After that, it's just how do you want to mix it, right? But in a similar fashion, if you wanted to, say that this one section here, which has, a nice clear breakpoint, if you wanted to say this is too loud or I want it actually deadened, say this was a bunch of chatter in between vocal takes. I know it's ridiculous, it's the whole bass part, but you'd use the change gain, and you can either bring it down if you feel like it still has to be there, or better yet, you use silence, and bam, it's gone. Right? So in the places where you absolutely don't want anything and you want it to just go to digital black, there you go. Undo silence. Okay, we'll leave that bass track alone. Let's go to something else, like one of these vocal tracks here. Somewhere down here. Keys. Let's just say this one, this keyboard pad right here. Okay. This is all just a keyboard pad, and you can see that it's needlessly in stereo, pseudo-stereo, and the part that really offends me is that there is all this material attached to it just because of the export process. In this case, you genuinely don't need it. You don't need your file size to be, 8 times bigger than it needs to be. So I would just delete it, and then this is all you really have. And if that was the right level, all fine. If you wanted it louder, you could change gain. I always have to remember to bring this number back to 0 when I do a search maximum so I don't get like a false reading. This says minus 13. I happen to know it's fine, but if I wanted to goose it a little bit and say, let's make it 5 dB louder, I'd hit it up 5, and boom, there we go. And now it's louder in the mixer itself. And if I wanted to put a permanent fade on it, because I just know that that's going to be a thing I never want to have to mess with, I can fade out there. There's only limited editing functionality in here, but for a few things to make permanent, it's okay, and it's good. So this is how I, once again, read the level of what's going on in here, in the mixer. So I'll get out of the editor here. We'll go to the mixer. So that is the permanent stuff. And of course, in Logic, you can, not that window, this one. You can, click on something like this and you can bring it up or down by a certain amount of gain. And this is more the technique I will use for mixing, right? My sense of how to mix is to, run through a section like this and say if I want it louder, I will select the tool here, the gain tool, and it's just a control or a command click, and I can run the levels up and down like this, and however granular I want to get, if I can find a suitable edit point, I'll go ahead and do that. And you'll notice that it breaks it into different parts. And if I feel like I have to do a little bit of smoothing in between, I'll just bring a crossfade in to kind of correct the gap a little bit. But for the most part, I would be getting into little things like is this the best level possible? This isn't stuff I do in a permanent file editor because this is a lot more attuned to exactly what needs to happen creatively and aesthetically for the mix. But some of these things, it's just right to have it a little down, a little up, clip gain. But that's kind of a difference. And so if you were to look at my mix, I wouldn't have any gain plugins at the top of the chain. I wouldn't have automation running until like pretty late, unless I had to do some sort of sound design. That's when I find automation is helpful, when I need something to move, when I need something to go beyond simple levels or EQ or whatever. Because oftentimes if I wanted to get this isolated with a certain effect, I'll just break it out onto a new track, set the effect that I want there, and don't think about it. It's not like I'm going to automate this whole flurry of effects and other processes, because that doesn't actually get you can't visually kind of spot it in the mix. You might know that the fader is moving, but if you forgot how many of those things you have going, that's why I just go ahead and stick it on another track, give it its own little treatment. If I think that's a thing to worth committing to, I'll bounce it to whether it's mono or stereo, depending on what I feel it needs. But you'd basically see my mix being built from a lot of clip gain editing, such that when it comes, when a sound comes into the mixer, just like in the analog world, you don't want to have it surprising the mixer too much, especially when you start getting into your more vintage flavor type of items where, say a tape machine is going to respond, or a compressor is going to respond very differently to, that extra 5 dB of gain. And you shouldn't have to set a compressor because you have a punch in that came in too loud. You just fix the punch in that came in too loud, and then the compressor could be set to one place instead of having to change it. So that's basically how I get the mix going and start finding out, what is really on the disc, what is coming into the top of the mixer channels, how can I get that to a workable point, where it seems like more of a mix is about where it belongs, and the same as you would be doing if you're on tape, but kind of correcting things, because when somebody sends it in, I don't have that chance to have been there when it was first recorded and making those decisions like you would if you were running a serious studio job and you're trying to print the right levels at the beginning. So I do a lot of this cleanup stuff before I get onto anything too creative. But as I'm getting to know these tracks, I'm saying, oh, that's too loud. I just know it's going to be too loud. It's a musical part that doesn't need to be that loud. I might give it a purposeful reduction, and it might be permanent. But if nothing else, I'll just go through and kind of comb through it and make sure there's no particular surprises or anything that doesn't seem like it, belongs there. Anyway, there you go. So we can talk about this more later on. Take care.